All right, so let's drill deep. Let's look at some markup types. Now, with standards in general, there's always very strong opinions about which is best. Yeah? And I'm not going to tell you which is best, but I'm going to give you some pros and cons for 3 types that we read and will scan for when we're looking for structured markup on web pages. The first of which comes from RDA. And RDA has a really great design. It comes from XML tradition, and it's very general. You can express a lot of different things with RDF. There's RDF-A that does an attribute-level mapping of RDF to XHTML. And that's cool. So you get all the power and design of RDF. The problem, though, is that sometimes this can be a little confusing to write. And in fact, in user studies with webmasters, they found that the nesting structure of RDF-A to be particularly confusing. That's when, say, you have an entity such as an event, which includes an entity such as a location. That's nested inside the event. That particular markup can be a little confusing. Another option is microformats, and this is just a different place to start. Publishers generally say this is easier to identify their data in existing HTML docs using microformats, but it's not as general as RDFA, so you can't express as many things. And there's one more, microdata. And microdata has the general expression of entities like RDFA, but it also maps more easily to HTML. And this is my preferred method. Yeah? I like it mostly because when I'm reading an HTML document, I can parse this easier. And so maybe that's just a personal preference. This is the one that I'll be using in examples today. Speaking of which, let's take a look at an example. I want to give you a URL first, and this is the rich snippet testing tool. It's at /webmasters/tools/rich snippets. It's a really cool tool. You can go there and put in any URL, and it'll tell you what data that it finds and gives you an example rich snippet if it can find enough data to construct one. Also, on the left of that page is a link to our documentation, which will clearly list out all the different types of structured markup that we'll look to and map to a rich snippet, and what are the different parameters that are required and optional. And it also gives examples for each. And again, this is what a rich snippet looks like. We're going to do an event. These are the properties for the event. I'll come back to this table several times, so don't worry about copying it down real quick. But you can see there's a number of different properties, and they're all pretty straightforward, from summary to URL to location. This is a page without markup. And it's, as we would expect, a very simple HTML page to be. We've got some data, and we've got some very, very basic formatting with line breaks. I'm going to take a look at this page in the snippet tool, just to get a default baseline expectation. So I've got structured-markup.appspot.com. This is just a static App Engine site. So I've thrown some static files onto App Engine so that you can play with them if you'd like. You want this URL? Oh, you want it bigger. How's that? OK, thank you. The no markup page looks like this. And you can see it's very basic. I just have some line breaks in there. It's not pretty at all. I wanted to make sure it was super basic so that we could see the markup as it gets in there. I'm going to go ahead and copy this URL and paste it into the rich snippets testing tool. And you can see there's insufficient data to generate the preview. That's what we'd expect, right? We don't expect it to find anything because, well, there's nothing to find there. So let's take a look at it with some data. I'm going to add in 3 bits of data, the 2 required types and 1 of the recommended types. And I really strongly recommend you add a location to your event as well. We've got a summary up at the top. That's required. And we've got the start date down there in the center, also required. And the location, of course, is where this event is taking place. And that's going to be a nested entity. Adding the markup, it looks like this. And let me take you through it line by line. At the top, we've got an item scope. And that item scope is super important and really basic. If you have a div tag or any tag that surrounds all the data for that entity, that's where you put the item scope attribute. And it's going to tell readers that everything inside, everything a child of that tag, is the scope of this item. Does that make sense? Oh, good. There's nodding. I like that. The next thing is we've got an item type. Just got to clearly indicate what kind of entity this is. In this case, it's an event. Now we've got item props. This is the item property. We've got three, as I mentioned: summary, start date, and location. And the data contained in those tags corresponds to that parameter, that property. Let's take a look at the nested one down here at the bottom. You'll notice that I have, next to the item prop location, another item scope and item type. Since it's nested, we're going to add another entity inside that parent entity. So it'll need an item scope and an item type to indicate it. In this case, we're going to list an organization as the location of this event. And of course, it has an item prop. I've just added one, the name. That's required. So let's take a look at this live. I like saying that. Over here, I'm going to go to the required markup link, and it looks like this. Notice, it's the same web page. I'm going to copy this and paste it into the Rich Snippets testing tool, and you'll see we have new output. We've got here in the center the Google search preview. So if we were to return a rich snippet in the search engine results page, it might look something like this. And down at the bottom is my favorite part. It tells us all the data that it found. So if we thought we were marking something up and it's not listed here, there's a problem somewhere along the way. Likely we put in the wrong item prop, or we put that attribute in the wrong place, or was looking for the value somewhere else. And so at this point, we'd look back at our code and see if we could find the error. Really straightforward, right? Okay. All right, let's add in a few more properties. And you'll notice some of these properties are going to change how the rich snippet looks, and some of them aren't. But since we have the data, we might as well mark it all up. So in this case, I'm going to add a URL, the description, the end date, and the event type. All of that data was already on the page, so I'm just going to mark it up. And it'll look like something like this. And you can see I've added the description right there, added the item prop and a span. I've added the end date. Both those dates have the ISO time and then a readable time. And down here at the location, I have the locality. Oh, and an event type down there at the bottom. And we'll take a look at what this looks like. So you can see a couple things have changed. One, I have a lot more data down at the bottom. Another, up at the search preview, you can see it's added the locality to the location. So a number of things didn't make it to the snippet, but it's still good that we've indicated to the world that those are on the page, and maybe we can take use of those in the future. But then some things do update the snippet. See how that works? And all I've done is added a few attributes and a couple span tags to surround data. I've not added anything to the page other than markup.